Hi, I'm Shelly Ware, and I would like to welcome you to FanForce TV and the Indigenous. Hang on one second, let me just press this button that is right in my way to the Indigenous Film Festival. It's fantastic to have you all here after such a powerful film in After the Apology. I know that many of you probably took some time to go and hug your children if they're safe at home with you. I certainly know that I did after that. It was quite compelling and quite deep. And, you know, I didn't want to let go of my baby to come here and talk, and Lauren took the opportunity to watch it last night. Unfortunately, I just watched it. So high emotions, as I imagine all of you listening have got emotions as well. But I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you meet today. I'm being on the land of the people of the Kulin Nations. I would like to thank them for being part of my son's cultural journey and thank them for looking after the land and the skyways and the waterways and making sure that this country is beautiful for my generation and for the next generation, and that it is our cultural responsibility to also look after this beautiful country for future generations. I'd like to thank them for being a part of my son's life and the community that I've built with. I've come from South Australia and I'm a proud Yankunytjatjara Wirangu woman, and it's very special to me that they take time to be a part of my son's life. I'd also like to acknowledge their elders, past and present, and any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are watching and who certainly would have been impacted by the movie that we just watched. So I'd like to welcome Lauren here tonight. She's our brave woman that is here with us. Now, Lauren Davies is a solicitor of the National Justice Project. She started off at the Macquarie University as a student placement, and now she is a paralegal in 2020. So well done to you and congratulations on that journey as part of the National Justice Project. She's a graduate of arts and criminology and laws, and now works as a junior solicitor with the National Indigenous Project. And she brings a lot to us today about policing and life experience, of course. We're down a couple of people, so it is just the two of us, and we're going to share our stories, and we would really love you to send some questions in. We're going to go through some questions that we have in mind to start it off. But if you have questions about what you just watched, please put them in the chat and we will get on with it. So let's get to it, Lauren. It was a pretty strong movie. Like, how do you feel? You watched it last night and you chose to for a reason. How did you feel afterwards?
It was heartbreaking personally, I do just want to say that I don't have personal experience with child removals, and to my knowledge, nor does my family. So for me, it was heartbreaking to see that families were still going through this. You hear about it through your family, and you know it existed back when your parents grew up. But to still hear it so raw and it happening even, worse than it really was back in, in the 1950s, that you're just shocked that how can you not be treated as humans? Why are we fighting to be recognized as humans in our own home? Why are we still being forced to take on this narrative that we're not good parents, that we're neglectful? It's frustrating, it's hurtful, and I cannot imagine the pain that those families are going through and continue to go through, and how that trauma is manifesting in the future. I mean, colonization has taken, we've taken a hit from that, and we continue to, and it's not a good feeling to know that it's still happening.
Yeah, it's quite devastating, isn't it? Like, I too haven't had removal of children in my own personal life and with my child, but my brother and I, we had a conversation only a few weeks ago where we talked about the impact of the stolen generation and that the impact that it still has in the generations that are still here. And now we've got our new stolen generations that are under new policies that the government has, that it's still happening. And one of the things that really stood out was I noticed a couple of weeks ago that my son was immaculate in his school uniform, and that the two children around him were just like regular scallywags walking, to school there. They'd grown, the uniform was shorter and all of these things, but my son was completely immaculate. And I called my brother and I said, I constantly have to have him looking beautiful, like, you know, and there's this real fear that if he doesn't, that he'll be taken away from me. And that's the only way I can make the outside world think that he looks, that he's well taken care of. And when in actual fact, it's not what you look like, it's the love and the nurturing and the kindness that it makes, you know, that you pass on through your child that brings them into this world as a strong individual. But it's those things that are making people think that we don't look after our babies, that we, you know, which isn't true. And I said to my brother, do you do this too? And he goes, I do. Like he said, if my son gets a scratch on his uniform, he goes, I throw it out. People are like, that uniform's still good. And he's like, I can't have him in that, my kids in that uniform in fear of them being taken. And it's just that intergenerational trauma that is passed on through those policies. And he said, you think about it, our grandfather was immaculate in his presentation because he didn't want our dad to be taken, and my dad was immaculate in his, because, you know, and it's that what we put out there. And unfortunately, it's the lack of understanding of how much we do love our children, Lauren, and that real sense of connection to our children that we have, and all people have, but it can be lost in the way that some people think we should look. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do think it stems in just not understanding how we love, how, like, what our family looks like, the dynamics and in that. You know, it's hard to comprehend when there is so much information out there now, when it's, because it is still happening. There's so many academics out there, we're getting taught in schools, you know, we're having conversations on the streets, and we're unapologetic about that. So for me, for me, there's still a disconnect as to why there is this unknown and fear of the unknown, and not understanding us when we've been here to have this conversation. You know, we've been telling you how, like, what we want and how we'd like to have these conversations, and what settings, and we're just not, we're heard, but we're not listened to.
Absolutely. And a lot of that's got to do with government policies that have been put in place. You know, we've got the policy of the assimilation policy, you know, with the direct, basically, so that we would be assimilated into white society, and that this black problem would just go away. And, you know, that's still, people are still affected by that. Our people are very much still affected by it. But it's also prevented people from not understanding their own country's history and culture of, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So they don't have a connection because they don't embrace Aboriginal history and culture as their own. They see it as ours, and they don't have a relationship with it. So there's that problem there about they're not listening because it's not their problem. And because we're so forced out into these, you know, fringe dwellers, we're sort of out of mind, out of sight. And that's the case of what we saw today in after the apology, out of mind, out of sight, like what you're talking about, you know, that we forget that this is happening. And that's why projects like this are just so important, you know, that we are having these conversations. But what about those grandmas against removal? You know, they're pretty special women, aren't they?
They are incredibly staunch, and the way they're able to support their family and then still support other families, other communities, and make a difference within the government as well. Like, the government are very aware of them, and they're doing an incredible job trying to enforce guidelines and principles in the institutions that are just neglecting them. And that takes a, you know, special type of people to do that. It's not easy. You probably get more losses than wins, but you do it because it's what's right. And I think because they've experienced such hurt, that's what's fueling them, because they don't want it to happen to other families, other communities. I come back from that sometimes, that hurt. I can't imagine it.
Yeah, and that trauma that comes with it, you know, I've seen it in children working in education for the past 20 years. It is so real, you know, and to have these women fighting so hard and wanting to change legislation, and they've got what's happening in New South Wales, but wanting it across Australia, and those stories at the end of when the credits were rolling, you know, I think we all left that film wanting to know what had happened to everyone and what was going on. So it was nice to see people reunited, and the fact that after 8 months of April fighting, that there hadn't been children removed in that time, you know, like that that's pretty special to show that their work is working, and that we'd like to see it across Australia. There were some really positive stories in that film, but there was certainly some statistics and some things that we know happen daily. You know, I can't talk about children at my school without someone immediately wanting to say, we should call the Department of Children's Services. And it's like, I haven't finished my sentence. Let me finish my sentence so I can actually talk to you and tell you what's happening in that family dynamic and who is supporting that child and who's there. But very, very difficult. But Lauren, talk to policing in Indigenous communities. Do you think discrimination towards Indigenous youth allows for the higher removal statistics?
Yeah, look, I do. And I think in terms of policing in Indigenous communities, we have to recognise the really fraught and fragile relationship police have with First Nations people and communities. And that's really rooted in colonisation and the role that police, and even in terms of child removals, caseworkers and docs played in destroying their culture, our language, you know, taking away our families. Police have also had a hand in deaths in custody, correctional centres as well. And so when we look at that context of this really fragile relationship, and then you throw in the police's idea of proactive policing, in other words, really over-policing communities, what you're really seeing is this, you're seeing more interactions with police and First Nations people, which probably wouldn't normally happen. But because they are, what you're likely to see is, you know, those interactions becoming escalated. You'll go from an offensive language charge, which, you know, whether you really think that should be criminalized these days. So you go from an offensive language charge to, well, that young person rejects that authority, and then the police are now slapping on a assault and resist arrest. And so now you're going before the court with these really serious charges, and at times they could lead you into the criminal justice system, into the jails. And so it's hard not to look at the systemic issue when there's so much discretion in each player's role. Did the police have to approach the young person? Did that offensive language warrant an arrest? Could it be a caution? Could it have been a warning, a fine even? Or the racism for me, or the racial bias that I've, you know, seen is in those discretionary instances, because the law says, you know, that offensive language it's an offence, but it's whether, you know, and the police have a power to be discretionary, and whether they have to charge it on an arrest, you know, it's up to them. And that's where it comes into this human error, I think, of racial bias. Racism is a human error that is perpetuated throughout these instances. And if we just stopped and reflect why, you know, black fellas are being placed in this role that they never asked for, then I think it opens up to the bigger question of, well, why are black fellas placed into this position in society? Why are we at the lower end? We didn't ask to be that in that position. And we're doing our best to self-determinate and to, you know, reject that narrative. But the institutions just are making it a lot harder. And, you know, in the bringing them home reports, in the Royal Commission into Deaths in Custody, there's answers in those inquiries, in the recommendations. Why aren't we listening?
They've been there for years and years and years. It's outlandish. And I guess I could talk to that on the experience of my girlfriend who works in the court system, and she gets notifications when one of our young people has offended. And while everyone was taking photos and celebrating the blood moon, that's what it was, wasn't it?
An eclipse, I don't know what
the orange or the eclipse or whatever it was, she was receiving message after message of our young people not going to remand centres, but actually going, excuse me, sometimes my asthma, my voice plays up, but she was receiving message after message for children, essentially, going straight to jail, not going to remand centres. And, you know, I don't know if any of you out there listening know, but working with children, the wind and the full moon certainly plays an effect on behaviour. But, you know, to hear that when I was talking to her on the phone and the messages were coming in about what the offences were and where they were going, to not go to the remand centre, but to go straight to jail, like that just broke my heart, you know, that's an actual step. And there are people fighting for that as well, which is absolutely devastating. But you often work on reports, Lauren, about the incarceration crisis of Indigenous peoples. So do you think that the statistics have improved in your opinion? And what changes in legislation do you think we need to put into place to further protect our Indigenous children and communities from further targeting?
Look, I think I did a bit of research in terms of the statistics, and they're based off the government statistics of which they published. And according to them, I mean, the statistics have increased. And so that means that what we're doing is either we're doing it incorrectly, or, you know, the system's broken. And so what I'd like to really emphasize is that there's been royal commissions, law reform commissions, select committees, you've got the, you know, reports, independent reviews that have analysed the law. They have, you know, these incredibly intelligent minds have analysed the law for us and provided recommendations of what we could do better to try and combat these issues. And you look at the Royal Commission that was published 30 years ago, we've got, you know, more than 470 deaths in custodies, and only, I think it's 64 recommendations are fully implemented.
Yeah.
And then we've still got further reports coming out. And it's like, when are these reports going to stop? And when are we going to look at what we've already looked at? And when are we going to actually implement and take action? Because at the moment, it doesn't feel like the government is taking it seriously.
Yeah.
That true commitment to stopping these statistics from increasing, and it hasn't happened.
It hasn't. No, it hasn't happened in our juvenile justice system, and it certainly hasn't happened in our removal of our children from our homes. And working with children, I see that there is a bias. It's immediate, you know, like I can report on a non-Aboriginal child, and it's, you know, they're going through a divorce. These things happen. An Aboriginal child, I can't even finish my sentence, and they want to call, they've already picking up the phone to call DHS. So it's quite startling. And, you know, you're right, the government needs to do more. They need to listen and they need to act. You know, that's what one of the things about Reconciliation Week is, that we ask, you know, it's not just a word, it's that we're asking you to act. We're asking you to do what you can. So we'll take some time now to go to some questions that we've got. So Michael had one up straight away. Michael Milston asked why white fellas so scared of self-determination. I don't think it's for all, Michael, but certainly shows in our government. You know, we've got the Uluru Statement of the Heart and wanting to be a part of, you know, a voice to Parliament, and just two governments saying no. If we knew, we would we would have solved that problem by now. I think sometimes. What do you think, Lauren? Before I say what I think.
Look, I think we kind of touched upon it before in terms of they're just so scared of the unknown. I think Nova Paris was who said that they're afraid that by giving us our recognition, that, you know, we're taking it from them, that we can't share it. Like, there's something along those lines in the ideology around that, in terms of like, if it's ours, it's only ours, and they now have to lose everything that they've, you know, achieved while they've lived in Australia. And that's just not the case. I think they don't understand what self-determination actually is and what that means in Australia, with all different mobs, because, you know, like the Uluru Statement of the Heart is us coming together from different clans, language groups, and being like, well, this is what we would like. You know, we've told them this is what self-determination kind of like, and it doesn't impede anyone else's rights.
No, we're not asking to take back land. We're not asking to take someone else's rights. We're just asking for respect and voice.
Yeah, and I don't think that the practical meaning of that in other people's minds sits well with them, or they just don't understand.
There's a lot of fear. Yeah. So Anne just said, so strong and powerful, and I work as closely as I can to create an authentic understanding for non-Indigenous people about history, culture and injustice. She's a teacher. Nice work, Ange. What can I do? How can non-Indigenous Australians support these areas of well-being? I can talk to the classroom. It's about making sure that you embed the curriculum, not just going standalone units where you just have a standalone unit, you do 2 weeks and move on to the next unit and the next unit, but embedding it across in your curriculum so that you find your room, in your classroom, your school full of children who are proud of Australia's Aboriginal history and culture and sharing the beauty as well as the hard history. So what can people do, Lauren, to support in these areas of wellbeing?
I think listen. I think when you're a non-Indigenous person and you're speaking to Indigenous issues, that it's the voice of the Indigenous person that has to be centered. It's not, like, respectfully, it's not about anyone else in the context of Indigenous issues. And so truly listening, making it about, not about you. I think moving away from this savior complex of trying to fix it on behalf of like Aboriginal people or Torres Strait Islander people. It's working together, listening to what Indigenous people want and need, and seeing if you can complement that. I think in understanding that you can never understand or relate, but you can empathize and use that empathy to complement what Indigenous people kind of need, I think is probably what I tell my my friends, my family, my colleagues in terms of addressing these type of things.
Yeah, and being a strong ally, what you're talking to, Lauren, so making sure that you are listening and that you can engage in any kind of, like we saw these really strong grandmothers marching, support them. There are charities that you can get behind, there's right to local government, there's so many different things that you can do to help support Aboriginal people. And like you said, Lauren, it's not about fixing it, like that's been a real problem in the past. People think, oh, we've got to give you this money and that's going to fix it. Well, that doesn't, it's the listening and all of that. So Sabine has a question for you, Lauren, and it's about with the new draconian bail laws in the NT, incarceration rates are predicted to skyrocket, so more children will be away from families. What is the National Justice Project planning to do?
So the National Justice Project primarily works in civil litigation and does do a lot of advocacy in terms of human rights. So because we don't necessarily work in criminal law, there's what we would probably want to do and try and do in areas that we don't necessarily focus in is do a lot of advocacy. So whether we support fundraising, we might submit a law submission to the government if they ever have inquiries. I think that as a solicitor, in terms of like what the National Justice can do, they're the type of avenues that we do try and use.
Yeah, and I guess as an individual, Sabine, we can write to Parliament, our local Parliament, and talk to them and say, I agree, I disagree, I want change, I don't want change, whatever your thoughts are, and write and get your voice across too and be a part of that conversation. And, social media is a good tool for that too, Lauren, sharing your thoughts on social media and spreading the word and talking about the film that you watched tonight as well. After the apology, I really feel like it's a film that everyone should be watching, that our whole Australian community should know about, and, that hopefully we can get it into more corporate workplaces so people are understanding what's happening. So Dylan says, how should non-school and non-government organisations that work with young people ensure that, one, they're not contributing to this system of removal, and two, actively working against it? Well, Dylan, I work in a school where I'm the Aboriginal Education Officer, and I know that that was part of the government made this, basically, they realised what had happened in schools. Our statistics were too high of school leavers, and there wasn't that support structure So me being in that school, I've been able to support 22 families as well as the children that I look after. Some need it more than others. Some I don't talk to, some I regularly, daily talk to, but that's about supporting them and being there for them. And as a school teacher, you know, and like I can't remember her name, the lady that said I'm over-invested. Like, you know, that man wouldn't have had his baby girl back if she wasn't so over-invested. I don't think you can ever be over-invested in children that you work with of any nationality, of any culture, of any colour. So making sure that you're a part of their family and their family trusts you and that these children trust you is a huge, huge part of it. And like Lauren has said the whole time, listening. What would you like to add to that, Lauren?
I think centering around the young person, they are probably the best person to really indicate if something is wrong or how they would like to be supported. I think we don't give enough credit to young people in terms of how they can communicate. And if you do have, you know, issues or you do have queries about whether they are supported, I mean, you can try and get them support through, you know, in culturally safe spaces. And so I think, yeah, my takeaway would be listening to the child. If it's about the child, you know, we should try and get their perspective and their opinion about things.
Maybe if we did listen to the children a bit more, we wouldn't have to have a film like this after the apology. But these children, when they're being ripped out of their parents' arms at 3 o'clock in the morning and, you know, taken from school and they don't even know that, you know, imagine sending your child to school and not knowing if you're going to get them home. And it's a possibility for so many Aboriginal families. You know, maybe if we listen to the children a bit more, we wouldn't be in this situation that we're in, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. That's all of the questions that we've got. Lauren, thank you so much for your time tonight. You were very brave and you did a fantastic job. I was very, very impressed, you know, considering we were 2 down. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and good luck with all of the work that you do with the National Justice Project. It's well needed and I'm really proud of you for doing that. I say that because I'm so old. I don't look it, but I am. And thank you to everyone for staying around and watching after the apology. Please make sure that you tell your friends about what you learnt today. Talk to your families about it, talk to your work colleagues and let them know that we do have a problem here in Australia that we've got to stop ignoring and that we need to do something collectively together about. So yeah, talk to your people. Lauren, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.